is, I think, thinking about it. Hold on. All right, we are officially live. Yay, I did it right. Hello, arty peoples, and welcome to another episode of Jerry's Live. My name is Emmy Klein. I'm your host this evening, and I am being joined by the one and only Jeff Olson.
Hello, everybody. Great to be here, Emmy. Good to see you again.
Thank you so much for joining me. And as always, Jeff has an incredible show planned for us, guys. I'm so excited. But before he officially takes over, I just wanted to remind you guys, number one, our self-portrait contest is still happening. So make sure you guys go check that out. I'm going to have our moderators put the links in the chat below, but that is still happening. And if you are interested in anything that Jeff shows us tonight, make sure you go to the website, jerrysartorama.com, and in the search bar, type today's class code, which is JL227, so 227. And then that should bring up the teacher's cart for Jeff, and then everything he's using, so that way you guys can check it out that way. But take it away, Jeff.
Thank you so much, Emmy. It's great to be here. I am not in my studio today. I'm actually on the road and traveling again, believe it or not. I'm in Savannah this coming week, or this week, actually, end of this week, and I will be doing some classes at Savannah College of Art and Design, doing some classes in their foundations department, illustration department, and doing a big lecture for everybody on campus that's going to be a hybrid. So it's going to be really exciting to see all that and see folks again and be out in person, and super fun. Always love going to SCAD and visiting Savannah. But tonight, from my hotel room, the luxurious Fairfield Inn, we're going to be talking about Cobra, and I have a presentation for everybody. We were thinking about doing this live, but that kind of got sidelined. So I'm not going to be doing a demo like I would have liked to, but I'm going to talk about it at the end, some of the things that I would have been covering, and encourage you to try on your own. And then, of course, as the year goes on, we're going to have some other attempts to get back in the studio with Emmy live, and I'm looking forward to that. But without further ado, I'm going to share my screen, and you should see my presentation pop up there real quick. There we go. You see that okay, Emmy?
Yes, I do. I see it just fine.
Perfect.
It's there.
We're in business. So, solvent-free oil painting, specifically join the Revolution. How cool is that? We're going to be talking about Cobra water mixable oil colors tonight, primarily. We were also going to be discussing Rembrandt to a certain degree, but really how I want to talk about Rembrandt is in conjunction with Cobra towards the end, and I'm going to talk about how you can use the two together. It's a question I get a lot. Can you use Cobra with traditional oils? Can you use them with other brands? And the answer is absolutely yes. And it's a great feature, and I'm going to share more about that. But right now, I want to go ahead and dive into this. And the first thing that comes up always is why paint solvent-free, right? Traditional oils, using solvents is a centuries-old tradition. It certainly can be done safely if you have good studio practice in place. But there are particular reasons why folks are looking for alternatives to using solvents in the studio. Of course, health comes to mind, and this is probably the biggest reason that folks are exploring alternatives. The presence of solvents can be toxic if you don't have proper ventilation. Some folks just have allergies or bad reactions to them, so they just can't use them at all. Of course, the environment is another consideration. Where do I dispose of solvents? And convenience is also a big part of it. If you're traveling, you can't bring those on the plane, for example, and how do you dispose of them or use them when you're out in the field? That certainly comes up with a lot of plein air artists. So there are a lot of different reasons for exploring solvent-free painting. Quick introduction to Royal Talens. Royal Talens is a Dutch manufacturer of artist materials, founded in 1899 in the Netherlands, a small town called Apeldoorn, which is about an hour east of Amsterdam by train. Some of our primary brands, our marquee brand being Rembrandt, and you can see in the inset one of the original tubes of Rembrandt watercolors there. Other brands besides Rembrandt that we make, we also are Van Gogh, oils, watercolors, pastels, Amsterdam, all acrylics, Bronzio pencils, Ecoline, liquid watercolors, and many, many more wonderful brands under the umbrella of the Royal Talens family. If you'd like to learn more about Royal Talens, I have the websites posted here. There's royaltalens.com, which is our international site. All sorts of great information there about our products, also inspiration pages, great DIY projects, and lots of answers to frequently asked questions. And then also Royal Talens North America, which tells you what's going on here. Royal Talens North America was established in 2015 in Northampton, Massachusetts. Of course, our products have been available in North America for many decades now. I think the 1930s were one of the first introductions of the product line, but it's always been through a third party. So now we have our own affiliate distribution center and customer service center, which makes it much easier for us to serve all the artists in North America. And then who am I? I am an artist, a painter for over 30 years exhibiting. I've been in the art materials industry for more than 20 years, primarily retail and art education. And then an educator. I taught university studio art and art history for about a decade. And if you'd like to learn more about me and my experience, you can visit jeffolsonart.com. All right, so today's agenda, we're going to talk about why Cobra. Why Cobra, the name? Besides some of the other questions, this one probably comes up as many as the rest. So we're going to answer that mystery, why we call it Cobra paint to begin with. Then I'm going to give a very brief history of oils, and then we're going to get into the pigments. This is always a popular segment. And since I've done a Cobra talk before, I have some new pigments to talk about tonight, some that you're familiar with, and hopefully some new insights to those. Then I'm going to talk about a binder, what it is, and then we'll get specifically into the binders that are used for oil paints. So this would pertain to traditional oils like Rembrandt and also Cobra oils. Then I'm going to talk about types of oil paints. There are different types of oil paints available. And then what is an emulsifier? That's the secret ingredient that makes all this work. And I'll share more details about that. Then we're going to talk about the types of emulsifiers because there are different types and they've been part of art making or paint processes in the studios of artists for centuries. So I'm going to share some background on that. Then I'm going to talk about the working properties of oils as it pertains to water mixable oils specifically. I always get lots of questions, how do they work? How do they compare with traditional oils? So we're going to talk about that briefly. Then I'm going to share some information for grounds. Now, this is something we didn't go into last time I was on the show talking about Cobra, but this question also comes up quite a bit. What kind of surfaces should I be working on? So I'm going to talk about that. And then I'm going to share some insights to the auxiliaries that are available. Those are the mediums made by Royal Talens for the Cobra line specifically. And then finally, I'm going to address some myths and give you some tips. So there's a lot of misinformation out there regarding water mixable oils in general. So we're going to dispel those. And then I'm going to share with you just a couple tips that I have for having a successful time working with the Cobra. And then I'm going to show you a new online magazine that you can access called Revolution. Talks all about Cobra, some great artist testimonials, great information about the whole line. So look forward to sharing that with you. And here we go. So why Cobra? So as you probably picked up on when I was talking about the brands that are within the Royal Talens family, Rembrandt, Van Gogh, for example, Amsterdam, there is always a nod in the naming of our product lines to the history of Dutch art. Of course, Rembrandt, most famous artist of the golden age of Dutch painting. Everybody knows who Rembrandt is. We have Van Gogh, of course, another equally famous Dutch painter. And Cobra is in that same vein. So Cobra was an art movement that started after World War II. It was made up of artists who were from Copenhagen, Brussels, and Amsterdam. Everybody having that aha moment? So that's where Cobra comes from. It's actually the beginning of the names of the cities where the artists participating in the movement came from. So Copenhagen, Brussels, and Amsterdam. And this guy over here with this great mustache and this awesome plaid jacket, his name is Karel Appel. He was the Dutchman in the group. And in the back image, you can see a sampling or a detail of one of his paintings. So the Cobra movement really embraced this idea of freeing themselves from the traditions of oil painting. It was an abstract painting movement. It was drawing sources from surrealism, primitivism, other earlier 20th century art movements like Expressionism. And we have a quote here from Carol Apple: "We do not want to be understood, we want to be freed." And when you look at the branding and labeling of Cobra, you'll often see the words infinite freedom. It was this that inspired us. So just as the Cobra painters were looking to be freed from the tradition of oil painting, we were looking to create a product that freed us from the use of solvents, enabled us to mix with water and have this new type of freedom as oil painters. So that is the connection, and this is where the name comes from. All right, so in the beginning, let's talk about oil paintings in general. So it's often misunderstood that oil painting began in Europe and during the Renaissance. But we have discovered as recently as 2001 some oil paintings in Afghanistan. And here's an image of them. You get in detail spot 2. It was a network of caves that were discovered that were filled with these beautiful murals depicting Buddha and the different lives of Buddha. And they were done in oils. The binder, it was discovered, was a combination of walnut oil and poppy seed oil, 2 oils that stay with us today as mediums in the process, and wonderfully preserved, and the technique highly refined. So while this is the earliest example dating back to the 7th century, you've got to believe that this technique did just not emerge out of nowhere. So I would imagine at some point we're going to discover even earlier examples of oil painting as time goes on. So a wonderful example of the earliest form of oil painting that we have on record. Then, of course, we do get to the 15th century in Europe. And here we have what is thought to be a portrait of Jan van Eyck, the grandfather of European oil painting tradition, and one of his most famous paintings, the Orfino wedding portrait. And I love how it zoomed in here. You probably can't see it very well on the screen, but the wonderful reflections that he created in that convex mirror in the back. Just really wonderful technique. His techniques inspired generations of artists afterwards. There's really more to the story, though. There were a lot of reasons that oil painting became the dominant form at this time. The traditional materials prior to oil painting for Europeans, as we're coming into the 15th century, were fresco, which is painting into wet plaster, and tempera, which is mixing pigment with egg yolks. They both had their drawbacks. They were quick drying, so you didn't have a lot of time to work into them. The tonal range was limited, and the colors were not very saturated or intense. And oil painting presented a solution or an answer to all of those problems. So it stayed wet, as you know, much longer, open as we refer to it, so you could rework it over a longer period of time. It had an immense tonal range compared to fresco or tempera. And also the colors, the level of saturation was so wonderful that they could really create these in-depth naturalistic colors. And you can really see it too as we go into what is probably one of the most famous paintings in Western art, and that's the Ghent altarpiece, which was done by Jan and his brother Herbert. And if you've ever seen this or seen it in reproduction, it really exemplifies the height of their technique with the oils. There was a real interest during the Renaissance to convey the realistic depiction of the natural world. There were scientific discoveries happening at this time. There was a humanism as a philosophy that was embracing Europe, and artists really wanted to share this visual experience to the best of their ability. So all these things came together, and oil was the perfect medium for expressing their ideas. And this wonderful piece, which probably has the most notorious history of all paintings in the European canon. And this has been damaged, burned, it's been stolen and returned and stolen again. I wanted to share this image though too, because the Getty did a wonderful project recently where I think it's 100,000 pixels. They put this painting on their site for access for scholars. So you don't have to travel to Belgium to see it. You can actually go online and get access to it and really dive down into the minutia of the technique that Jan and Herbert applied to this wonderful work of art. All right, one thing that gets overlooked a lot in the history of art in terms of its importance is the invention of the tube. And this gentleman, this dapper guy here, this is John Rand. He's an American. He was an expat living in Great Britain at the time. And you can see below him one of the earliest tubes of oil paint. So in 1841, we have the tube. Prior to that, and we have some great images here that I found from Gainsborough's studio, so almost 100 years before, and you see here pig skin or pig bladders being used to store paint. A little cork put in them, really kind of tedious process, and the paint tube revolutionized many aspects of painting for artists. First of all, the portability of it was increased dramatically. Many people paint the impression or credit the paint tube with the Impressionist movement. You had artists like Monet and then post-impressionists like Van Gogh traveling out to paint on plein air. The tube made it much easier, but it also broadened the demographic of people who had access to it. So you have this whole group of enthusiasts, if you will. So folks who were not professional artists per se, but just had a passion for painting and wanted to discover the medium for themselves, and now had access to these colors. No longer did you have to grind the pigments in your studio or go specifically to what was called a colorist back then to get expensive paints made. You could get access to the materials and explore it on your own. So really a revolution in not only the ability for artists to work in a variety of environments, but also the number of people who were able to embrace this technique for themselves. All right, so let's talk about pigments. I promised some new pigments from my previous talks, and I've got some fun ones here for you. But first, I want to talk about how we categorize pigments. So there are different ways that we organize them, and one is by origin. And that is broken into 3 categories. We have organic, inorganic, and synthetic pigments. The example of organic pigments that I'm going to share with you today come from these little guys. They're murex. They're a type of Mediterranean sea snail, and they are responsible for the color Tyrian purple. Tyrian purple gets its name from the ancient city of Tyre in Lebanon. This color was manufactured as early as 1570, I think it was, BCE by the Phoenicians. And interestingly enough, this purple gets its name from them and vice versa. In ancient Greek, Phoenicia meant land of purple. So they created these wonderful pigments and dyes from them. It was incredibly expensive because it took thousands of these little guys to make the color. And it had a unique quality, especially for an organic pigment. It was very light fast, and it actually became richer and deeper in color as time went by. The Romans referred to it as imperial purple. And of course, this association with purple with royalty derives from this period. It was very valued and prized, and the garments were very valued and prized because they actually got better with age. Interesting fact about the pigment itself. The next pigment I have is a very common pigment. It comes in many, many names, from blood red, sanguine, which of course means blood, caput mortem, which I love, is just deadhead. Of course, we're looking at iron oxide red, the original natural iron oxide red, which is an inorganic pigment. So these are mineral-based pigments. It's a wonderful color. Of course, today we have a synthetic version that was invented in the 18th century. Its pigment PR101. The natural iron oxide is PR102. So that's the distinction if you're looking on the tube to find out what's being used in yours. Today, most of the red oxides or Venetian reds or terracottas or terra rosas, all of them using this pigment are going to be PR101. But some artists still seek it out because this natural pigment has a lot of wonderful qualities, wonderful opacity, great tinting strength, and of course, it's very light fast. Its origins are ancient. They can be found, this pigment, on the caves of Spain. We're talking prehistoric art, all the way around the globe to the wonderful dream paintings, Aboriginal dream paintings of Australia. And it even was the favored drawing color during the Renaissance. Literally, these minerals were picked up on the ground, formed into sticks or chalks or mixed into paints, and applied to create wonderful colors throughout the centuries and still today. I think it's one of those colors we kind of take for granted because it has been around so long and it is so prolifically used, but it's such a staple and essential part of our palette. I felt it would be great to talk about it a little bit. So that is an example of an inorganic pigment. Finally, we have a synthetic pigment. So synthetic pigments, like I mentioned with the red oxide, we have a synthetic version today. Most modern pigments are synthesized, either beginning as organic or inorganic, and then changed chemically. It can be heated up, other ingredients can be added to it, or like in this back picture, it can be exposed and treated in a way that it changes its working properties. So what we're looking back here is the stack method of making lead white. So while it's very much a modern feature of pigments today, synthetic pigments, it's something that's been practiced by artists for centuries. So lead white, the favorite white of the Renaissance, was created in this process. You see these coils of lead that are in these clay pots, submerged in vinegar, packed in cow dung to generate heat, and encourage the lead to oxidize, creating this white crust on the lead, which was flaked off, ground up, and became the wonderful pigment that we know as lead white and popular with oil painters all the way up through the 20th century. So those are the three categories of pigments: organic, inorganic, and synthetic. All right, so those are the coloring agents. So what else goes into the paint? So the other primary ingredient in a paint is the binder. And it's the binder that really gives the paint its working properties. Pigments are universal. We use the same pigments in oil paints and acrylic paints and watercolors, but the binders are what make each paint have unique types of working properties. What does the binder do? It has to do at least these two things: suspension and adhesion. So pigments are like sand. We put them into water, we can stir them up, they will disperse, but eventually they sink back down to the bottom. So a binder needs to be able to hold them in place or suspend them once they're stirred up. And you can see this wonderful image. This is the big mixers that we have at Royal Talens making the paint. Think of the granddaddy of all KitchenAid mixers, where the dry ingredients are added to the binder and mixed together, and the pigments are suspended in this process. The second is adhesion. So it needs to stick to something that you painted onto, right? So the binder has to be a great adhesive. So suspension and adhesive. You could also add to this that it creates a paint film, and oil certainly does create a very durable paint film, but not all binders create paint film. Gum arabic, which is the primary binder for watercolor, for example, actually absorbs into the paper, and there's no discernible paint film there. But paint film is something that we want to consider when we're talking about oil paints. So that is the binder, and let's talk about these binders for oil paints. There are some variety that have been used throughout the centuries. Linseed oil, and you see that first image there on the left, those are flax seeds. That's the origin of linseed oil. They're actually pressed or expressed from the seeds, the oil is. And linseed oil has been the primary binder for oil paint for centuries. It has the strongest paint film, so it dries to the durability that exceeds all the others. It also dries fairly fast compared to other drying oils. So drying oils are a group of vegetable oils that actually dry to create a paint film. There are a lot of vegetable oils out there. For example, canola oil, which you probably could mix pigment into, but it would never dry and create the paint film necessary to preserve the pigment over time. So linseed oil is one of the drying oils that does that, and does it exceptionally well. The downside, or the only downside to linseed oil, is that it can yellow over time. And you can see this most often in whites. And that's why we sometimes, as manufacturers, will put other types of oil in with the linseed oil, primarily safflower oil, which I'll talk about in a minute, to help limit that. The next oil I'll talk about is walnut oil, a favored oil during the Renaissance. I mentioned it in some of those early examples of the oil paintings found in the caves of Afghanistan. So it's been a binder that's been around for a long time for oil paints. It is also a strong bonding paint film that's created with walnut oil, not as strong as linseed, but also very durable. It does have the benefit of being non-yellowing, and it's fairly lighter. So it can be used often in place of solvents in some painting techniques. So walnut oil been around for a long time. I mentioned safflower oil, and you can see that beautiful flower where it comes from. Safflower oil is very popular because it also is non-yellowing like the walnut oil, and it can be added in with the linseed oil in the manufacture of whites to prevent yellowing over time. It doesn't create as strong as a paint film as linseed oil, so you don't often see paints made with only safflower oil. and it dries a little bit slower. So this is why you may experience when you're painting with white or adding white to other colors that those colors take longer to dry. And that's because of the presence of the sapphire oil. And then finally, poppy seed oil, another oil binder that I mentioned in the discussion of the paintings in Afghanistan. It's been with us for centuries. It is also a non-yellowing, lighter type of oil, not as durable a paint film as the others, and often used in the making of varnishes. It's actually ideal for that because of its fat content. So poppy seed oil you'll see in a lot of mediums and also in a lot of varnishes. So those are 4 of the drying oils. There are more than that, but these are the ones that you'll most often encounter. All right, types of oil paint. So we have traditional oil paints, which are primarily a drying oil like linseed oil mixed with pigment, and that is our traditional oil. Alkyd resins, you're probably familiar with this in terms of mediums because alkyd mediums are very, very popular. These are synthesized from a type of vegetable oil and synthesized with types of alcohol and acids, actually. Alkyds have the great benefit of drying very rapidly. They were actually invented at the early part of the 20th century as a coating for electrical wires by General Electric. But it wasn't long before the benefits of alkyd resins in commercial paints became known. And most oil-based paints that are used commercially are a type of alkyd resin. Some of the benefits, like I said, for oil painters in the type of alkyd paints that are out there were that the paints dried much faster, so you could do techniques like glazing much more easily or much more quickly. A couple drawbacks to alkyds, though, they don't hold as much pigment, so the colors weren't quite as intense, and the working properties not quite in line with traditional oils. And today, because there are so many alkyd mediums available, alkyd paints themselves have kind of waned in popularity, and most artists will start with the traditional, add the alkyd resin to it to speed up the drying time. And then finally, water miscible oils. So water miscible oils, like Cobra, are a true oil paint. They are just like a traditional oil paint. They're made with a linseed oil binder, Cobra is, and pigment. And then we add another ingredient called an emulsifier. So what is this emulsifier that I speak of? So what is an emulsifier? Emulsifiers on a molecular level consist of a water-loving hydrophilic head and an oil-loving lipophilic tail. And it's kind of explained in this little diagram. So you can see the water, and you can see the fat molecule or the oil molecule floating in the water. And the emulsifier, when added, connects itself to the oil. You can see its oil-loving tail there. And then the water-loving head helps it to secure or bond with the water. So this is what's happening on a molecular chemical level, if you will. The chemistry behind what's happening is the addition of this emulsifier allows for water to bond with the oil molecules in the paint, therefore allowing you to mix water with your paint and the painting techniques that you usually would have used solvent. So it's really incredible technology, but it's not a new technology. Artists have been adding emulsifiers and using emulsifiers in their painting process for centuries. So let's look at some of that. So types of emulsifiers. So here's some examples of ones that have been used in art making over the years. First, we have the egg yolk. I mentioned tempera painting all the way back in the Renaissance, and it existed long before that. Tempera painting is where the pigments are mixed with an egg yolk or egg white, but mostly egg yolk. And the egg yolk includes an emulsifier known as lecithin. Lecithin is that molecule we were looking at that serves as the emulsifier, having a water-loving and an oil-loving aspect to it that allows you to use water as your vehicle, as your solvent for tempera painting. The second is casein. You see this milk here. Casein is essentially milk fat. Again, a very ancient artist binder. It's used in common with a lot of other types of adhesives in techniques known as distemper. So it's that type of painting where you literally are using a type of adhesive to suspend the pigment in as your binder. And casein dates all the way back to Egyptian times. It was used throughout ancient Egypt in painting processes, along with other types of painting like encaustic. So casein, another type of emulsifier or emulsification that includes that lecithin ingredient. Lecithin, by the way, is found throughout nature. Almost every living thing has lecithin in it. It's in our own bodies holding the water and fat together. I might have a little extra of that right now myself. And then finally, we have soybeans. Soybeans are a drying oil, just like the ones we discussed, and can be used as a binder in oil paint. The paint film does not dry very solid like the others, so it's very rarely used all by itself, but it can be used in combination with others. And soybeans, unlike the other drying oils, contain this lecithin. So they have the emulsification, the ability to be an emulsification or emulsion, as we refer to it. And it's that where we derive the ingredient that we add to our Cobra. So it comes from these soy oil extracts, and that is what is added to the Cobra paint, a traditional oil paint that allows you to mix water. Pretty cool, huh? All right, so let's talk about the working properties of Cobra. And these are going to be, as you'll discover, the exact same working properties that you have with traditional oils. So what is the drying time of Cobra? Exactly the same as with the traditional oil. Adding water to it will speed up the drying time, but so does adding solvent to a traditional oil. So whenever you add more solvent and make the paint cleaner, you're going to see an increase or a decrease in the drying time. So the drying time of Cobra is the same as a traditional oil. Pigmentation. There is just as much pigment in Cobra as there is in Rembrandt. High levels of pigmentation. The amount of emulsifier that's added does not displace the amount of pigment, and you'll find wonderful saturated color in the Cobra Artist line. The paint film, the durability of paint film. This is a linseed oil binder. Again, you have a very durable paint film, just like you would expect, one that has been tested over the centuries. Mass shift. So this is also important for oil painters, right? So that the brush mark you make or the mark you make with a palette knife in traditional oil painting, that stays the same as it dries. So we have this process of oxidation. Oil paints, or the oils themselves, absorb oxygen from the atmosphere, and that's how they dry. And because of that, there is no shift in the mass of the mark making that you make. So even after days, weeks, or years, that wonderful texture remains. And that is true for Cobra as well. The addition of the emulsifier does not change that performance or that behavior, and you still can expect to have these very wonderful textures when working with Cobra and impasto techniques. Color shift. So again, oil paints are known to have no color shift, right? So the color you see on your palette when the paint is wet is going to be the same that you see on your canvas after the paint is dry, and that is true for Cobra also. The addition of the emulsifier or water to it does not make the color shift. Now you'll notice when you work with Cobra, when you first add the water to the paint, there's a slight color shift on the palette. This is the emulsification process that's kicking in, but that quickly goes away and you don't see any color shift during the drying time or the drying process of Cobra paint. And then finally, solvents, and this is the big plus, right? Where we have to use turpentine or odorless mineral spirits with traditional oils. Now we can use water in place of the solvent, and a huge convenience in the studio or if you're traveling or painting on plein air. So the working properties of Cobra will be the exact working properties that you're familiar with working with traditional oils. So let's talk about grounds. This is a question that comes up. What is a ground? First of all, why is it important? And then we'll talk about what surfaces are, and then sizing and gesso as it relates to Cobra. So the first thing, I've got it down here below that I want to say, is water mixable oil should not be used on an oil primed surface. So you're adding water to your paint, right, as you're putting on those lean layers. If you have an oil primed surface, so the presence of oil that does not or has not gone through that emulsification process, you're going to get some resistance there. The paint is not going to dry properly, nor is it going to adhere the way that it should. So we want to stay away from oil primed surfaces. So let's go back up to the top. What is a ground? So the ground is that layer that separates the surface, be it a canvas or a panel, from the oil paint itself. And it's super important. And it's important because the oil paint is corrosive to the canvas and the wood panels. It can make them rot over time, so we have to protect them. The second thing is the ground helps to present a layer that the oil paint can get its hooks into. So the adhesion is much better. And then finally, a good ground will help with the drying process, nice, even drying. I see more often than not when folks come to me with problems with a traditional oil painting or a Cobra oil painting, where the paint is not behaving the way it should in the drying process, it's usually because the ground was not prepared properly. So really important to have a properly prepared ground. Surfaces that can be used with Cobra are the same as any surface that you use for traditional oil painting. So obviously canvas, wood panels, anything that you can properly size or gesso other than oil primed surfaces. So what is sizing? I use that term and I get that question a lot, especially folks who are just getting started with painting. So historically, before the invention of acrylic gessos contained linseed oil. So they often were made of linseed oil, chalk, calcium carbonate, marble dust, lots of different ingredients as we go back over the centuries. But one of the primary ingredients was linseed oil itself. So you had to protect your surface from that gesso. And what was used was sizing. Historically, it was a type of animal hide glue. Rabbit skin glue was very popular. You would brush that onto the surface, and that would protect the canvas from the oil. It also would help it tighten if you were using canvas on the surface. But ultimately, just like when you're sizing a piece of paper, it prepares that surface for the best possible result with what you put down over the top of it. So we have our sizing down. Then we would use those traditional layers of gesso over the top of it. Now, there are many artists who still like to use oil primed or oil based gessos, so they still need to size their canvas. And those traditional ones I mentioned are still available. Contemporary ones are like acrylic binders or PVA sizes that can be used in place of that. But most people today use gesso, an acrylic-based gesso, as their ground for oil painting. Most of the canvases that you buy pre-primed are primed with an acrylic or universal primer based on the same acrylic emulsion. So completely safe to paint oil paint, any type of oil paint, including Cobra, over the top of that. I recommend triple primed, and if you're doing your own, at least 3 coats of gesso, preferably more. And there are some great details that I'm happy to share at another time on creating a wonderful surface with gesso. Some great techniques that I can share with you on that. But just a couple notes here today on grounds for Cobra. All right, so let's talk about the auxiliaries. So the auxiliaries for Cobra, we have 4 wonderful ones to choose from. We have the traditional painting medium, we have a glazing medium, we have a quick dry medium, and we have a painting paste. So auxiliaries are used to adapt the consistency, create transparency, alter the drying time and the finish and or the finish of your painting overall. So you mix them directly with the paint on your palette, or you can dip your brush into them as you go. And I'm always recommending moderation as the key. So the painting medium that I mentioned first is going to make the paint more fluid. It's going to make the paint brush strokes level out a little bit. It will increase the transparency of the paint. It does not change the drying time. You'll have the same drying time. It makes the paint a little fatter. So if you're layering, that's something to take into consideration. And it will increase the gloss. The most important thing for me in using the painting medium is that it really helps the paint release onto the surface more effectively and helps you push the paint around. It just makes the whole experience much more enjoyable and a lot more fun when you add just a little bit of painting medium to the paint. Glazing medium is probably the fattest, and it's made or developed specifically for those artists who like to layer their paint in those wonderful transparent veils of color that we refer to as glazing. It's the fattest, so it allows you to control the fat over lean process the most effectively. It has the highest level of self-leveling to the paint, so the brush strokes pretty much disappear when you're using a glazing medium. It gives you that glassy surface that we see in all those wonderful Renaissance paintings. So specifically, the glazing medium has those effects. Obviously, it makes it more transparent. No change with the drying time. Matter of fact, I would think the more you add, the longer the drying time is going to be, and it does make the painting much shinier, much glossier. And the quick dry medium, very much like the painting medium, with the addition that it will speed up the drying process 20 to 30%, depending on how much you're adding and what your process is and how thickly you're applying the paint. But it's very popular. A lot of the plein air artists that I know who use it for that reason. It helps them to work more quickly when they're out in the field. So one of our really popular mediums. My favorite is the painting paste. So the painting paste, a lot of people refer to it as transparent paint. And essentially that's what it is. There's no change in the consistency of the paint. It actually has the same feel of the paint out of the tube. It's kind of amber in color as it comes out of the tube. And it really, really takes to the pigment. It takes just a little bit of paint added to this to create wonderful color. It will increase the transparency, but you can still, depending on the ratio, I usually use it 1-to-1 with the paint. You can still get some pretty opaque colors, especially if the pigment is opaque to begin with. It's really a great way to extend your paint. And as you add it, you don't lose any of the mark making. And I really love the texture and impasto techniques, and this is a perfect medium for that. Cobra also has some varnishes in the spray format. We have matte, satin, and gloss. One note here, this varnish, as well as all varnishes, do contain solvents, an essential ingredient in a varnish. It's what allows the varnish to be removed later by restorers and curatorial staff. The whole reason for having the solvent in there means that you can take it off without damaging the underlying paint film that's down there. So just keep that in mind, that these varnishes do have solvents just like other traditional varnishes. All right, we're almost there, folks. So myths and tips. Let's get through these. I've answered some of them, but I think it's worth going over them again. So myths: water miscible oils contain water. False. There is no water in the tube. I hear this tossed around, water-based oil paints. There's no water in them. They're a true oil paint, linseed oil, pigment, and no water in the tube. They can be mixed with water, but they don't contain water. So another myth is that they're not a true oil paint. That is also false. Artists have been using emulsifiers with their paints for centuries. Rembrandt used the emulsification process from eggs to create wonderful texture in his paintings. He wasn't interested in mixing water with the paints. Had he would have been able to do it. But this process has been around for centuries and does not sacrifice anything with the paint in and of itself. So it is absolutely a true oil paint, linseed oil, binder, and pigment. That water miscible oils dry faster than traditional oils. That is also false. The addition of water in your painting process, whether you choose to do that or not, does not speed up the drying time any differently than adding solvents to traditional oils. That they work like acrylics. That is also false. These are a true oil paint. And even when you add water, you're not going to see anything like acrylics. Acrylics are very unique. Their binder is very unique, and their working properties are very different from these type of paints. That they cannot be mixed with traditional oils, and that is false. You can mix Cobra with Rembrandt. You can mix it with any other artist grade paint out there. The binder is the same, and no problem in mixing these paints with any other paint that you currently have in your toolbox. But they can be mixed with acrylics. And this is false. Now, I know there are some folks out there who advocate for this, and certainly on your palette, as you're mixing these together, you're not going to see any adverse effects. But the two binders, the acrylic polymer emulsion and the linseed oil, dry very, very differently. I mentioned how oil paints oxidize. They absorb oxygen from the atmosphere. This is a very slow process. Acrylics evaporate, which is a very rapid process. They'll be dry within 24 to 72 hours. So while you may be able to mix these paints while they're wet, over time, as these paints dry, depending on how they're layered in the painting, you may see some really drastic alter or changes or damage occur as a result of these two different binders reacting against each other. So some folks have not had any problems, but as a manufacturer, I just cannot recommend it to you without sharing those risks. Finally, water miscible oils are not archival. Again, false. Like we have discovered, emulsifiers have been part of the painting process for centuries. These paints are very much an archival product. Have less pigment. That too is false. So it's true that earlier generations of water miscible oils, and I'm going back 30, 40 years now, were not meant as professional tools, didn't have as much pigment. The chemistry involved was very different. And so if you used paints back in the 70s or 80s, were not satisfied with the results. The paints that are being made today, Cobra, is nothing like that. And the level of pigmentation in the Cobra Artist paint is of a high level. It's our extra fine milling, and you're going to be really satisfied with the colors that you get with these paints. All right, some tips. When using Cobra mediums, moderation is best. I mentioned this in the previous slide. As with anything new that you're adding to your palette, it's always best to practice moderation. You really only need a little bit of the painting medium or quick dry medium to have an effect, to see a change in the working properties. Get used to it, get the feel for it as you're using it. And as time goes on, then you can add more, and you will find there's a whole variety of techniques that you can explore by adding the mediums with the Cobra paint. And here is a great tip, really important. Now, in the previous column over there, I said you can mix with traditional oils, and absolutely the truth. You can, if you maintain this ratio 2-to-1, combine Cobra oils with traditional oils. If you maintain a 2 parts Cobra to 1 part traditional ratio, the paint will retain its water miscibility. One of the things I wanted to demonstrate for you in person, but if you have Cobra at home, or if you're going to get it and you have a traditional oil, definitely try this. You're going to be amazed. It's like magic. You've got 2 parts Cobra, 1 part your traditional oil. And the great thing about this is that you don't have to abandon all your investment. If you're looking to go solvent free, if you're looking to try these paints, all the traditional oil paints that you own can be incorporated into the process. You can use them together and achieve these same results. So a really wonderful feature of the paint here. And then finally, my recommendation here, not to exceed a 1-to-1 ratio of paint with water. So you don't want to have more water than you do paint when you're mixing on your palette and going on to the painting. And that's to maintain the paint film integrity. Now, there are a lot of folks out there going, oh my, I really love to tone my canvas first. I use just a little bit of paint with a lot of solvent to do that. What can I do if I can't exceed this 1-to-1 ratio? Well, there is a tip, and that tip is to use the painting medium in combination water 1-to-1. So you can mix the painting medium with an equal amount of water first, and you get this very fluid mixture. And then you can add a small amount of paint to that and create a wonderful wash of color onto the surface that will behave very much like what you're used to by adding solvents to traditional oil paints, give you that really, really wonderful tone to your canvas and enable you to work back into it successfully without sacrificing the integrity of the paint film. So a wonderful technique there that I would encourage you to explore. All right, so here, as promised, is the online magazine. There you can see the link to it. You can do a screensaver right now, and we can try to post this as well in the comments. But go check it out. There's testimonials from artists, different types of artwork being created. You can really see a new generation of painters embracing this. The whole context of solvent-free painting, where it came from, where it's going, lots of frequently asked questions, the origin of pigments, you name it. This magazine has it, so definitely look that up if you're interested in Cobra. Great resource. And then finally, the giveaway, Emmy.
Yes, I didn't mention this at the beginning, and I was wondering, I was going to spring it on you, and I'm so glad you said something.
Perfect, perfect. So we're going to give away a set of the Cobra, the set that includes 10 colors. It has some painting medium in it. It's got a little mixing cup. It's got some of the wonderful Cobra brushes. And I'm going to post the question, Emmy, right now.
Ooh, what's the question?
What's the question? So folks, pay attention. I'm going to ask.
People were paying attention, especially during his demos. They should know by now. Anytime you're in here.
Know by now, yeah. So I have a question based on the information that I've shared. I'm going to post that up, and so you'll want to put the answer into the comments on the feed, and then we'll go back after the show and pick a winner who gives somebody who had given the correct answer. So is everybody ready for this?
I think they're all, I'm starting to get a ton of really excited comments coming up.
Right,
so I think they're ready.
All right, here is the question. What ingredient is added to Cobra oils that allows you to mix with water? What ingredient is added to Cobra oils that allows you to mix with water?
All right, now just so we're going to do the same thing that we always do, just so everybody knows. I'm going to give you a grace period. As soon as we sign off on the show, I'm going to give you until 6:45 Eastern Standard Time to comment on this video, the answer. If you comment the answer and you get it correctly, you can't just say whatever. It has to be the correct answer. And if you add it in before 6:45 Eastern Standard Time, then we will make sure to, here, let me do this so you guys can actually see both of us here.
You can barely see me. Sorry, the lighting in my
There we go.
the lighting from the window is now gone. So I'm using my phone lighting.
I was telling you, it's a little dark. It gets a little dark once about 6:30 hits. But yeah, if you guys do, make sure you put the comment in for your answer. We will give you until 6:45 Eastern Standard Time to get that answer in. Watch the show again. Or you can also read the comments that are coming in. I have so many right now. But we'll give you that grace period, and then we'll pick it from a hat, and we'll make sure to do the announcement it's usually within about a week that we do this, before the next Jerry's Live. But I did have a few questions that perfect. Most of them were answered on that last page of yours, that tips and tricks, which was so awesome, because I was like, there's that question, there's that question, there's that. It's great. But there were a couple on there that people had that didn't get answered there, and I wanted to actually quickly have that conversation with you. The first one was, because there are different brushes for different mediums, like this is my watercolor brushes, these are my acrylic brushes, and then you have your traditional oil brushes. Can you use your traditional oil brushes for the Cobra as well?
Great question. So a lot of folks recommend synthetic brushes, and I would recommend that as well, because we're using water, right? Natural bristle brushes, for example, or sables, those types of brushes don't fare well with water. They can damage the brush. A lot of it has to do with how you use the brush. Now, I use some bristle brushes with Cobra, but I don't really use a lot of water in my process. So it really depends on how you're painting. So my recommendation would be a synthetic brush or a blend. But if you really take care of your brushes and you don't leave them sitting in water, the brushes you typically are comfortable with using with oil paints, you could use with Cobra too. But I think the majority of folks who are painting with Cobra out there would recommend some type of synthetic. And synthetics today are so wonderful. There are some wonderful brands out there. I use the Princeton brand of brushes a lot, but I've got a lot of different brushes that I am really, really happy with.
Yeah, no, that's a definite amazing answer, because I didn't even occur to me the fact that natural bristles and water. Yeah. Like, I didn't even think about that. But that's great to know. Then the other one is, because, and I know this was kind of mostly addressed in your tips, your myths section. Whenever it comes to putting oil paints on top of acrylics, the Cobras still act that way. So can you still do a underpainting with acrylic paint and then put that Cobra water mixable oils on top?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So just like with traditional oils, you can paint them over the top of acrylic, just not the other way around, right? Mm-hmm. So you can do your, composition, layout, blocking in your shapes, your underpainting, all in acrylic. And once that's dry, you can paint over the top of it with traditional oil or with Cobra. Absolutely no problem. Awesome. So yeah, so same would apply. Most of the processes, working properties, techniques that folks know with their oils are applicable here. I think one of the biggest things that I addressed in the conversation is the oil primed surface. You just want to stay away from those oil primed surfaces. Beyond that, your experience is going to be virtually the same. You're just going to be replacing the solvents, the mineral spirits, with water. Which,
along that same line, because I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, and I just wanted to run it past you just in case. And I wanted to make sure I word this correctly. She was asking if you mix water in as your solvent with Cobra, and then that water evaporates, will your paint have will it have shrunk at all?
No, no,
That's so
no.
fun.
Actually, the water, the process that I showed on there, that type of bonding that happens in an emulsion. So you're taking two ingredients, oil and water, that typically don't like to play with each other, and you're adding a third ingredient that kind of holds them together. So that's different than the chemistry that happens when you add turpentine or mineral spirits to oil. Those solvents literally dissolve the linseed oil. So there's a molecular change to the linseed oil itself. That's a significant difference in the chemistry of how it works. And that does affect the working property a little bit. But as far as the evaporation of the water out of the paint, to your question, there's no effect to the paint film. So the water evaporates out fairly rapidly, just like the solvent evaporates fairly rapidly. And because there's no chemical change, molecular change to the binder itself, you're left with a very durable and stable paint film. And you're not going to see any type of shrinkage, wrinkling, cracking as a result. Do keep in mind that 1-to-1 ratio.
Yes.
No more, yeah. And if you want to get a really thin layer or lean layer of paint, use that tip that I recommended of mixing water with painting medium first in a jar, and then add that to the paint, and you can create some really wonderful washes and go for it from there.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was like, but what if you need to exceed the, and then you answered the question. The other questions we had were the tips that you showed. Is that universal across the board for all water mixable oils, or is it just specifically Cobra?
No,
yeah.
That's Cobra. That's
okay.
Cobra. We all have our own proprietary methods out there as manufacturers, and we're not all using the same type of chemistry per se. So it's only a recommendation that I can make with Cobra. Now, they may have some similar recommendations in the use of their paints, but I'll leave that to them.
Yeah, usually it's written somewhere either on the tube or on their website. You can find it. Yeah. And then the other question is, which is kind of in the same realm, can Cobra be mixed with other water mixable oils? Now, also, is it water mixable or water miscible?
Oh, well, miscible just sounds cooler, doesn't it?
It does. It does. It's like, but are you saying
it's essentially the same thing? It's essentially the same thing. And the answer is yes. There are a lot of artists I know who use Cobra and also use some other brands of water mixable oils on their palette, as well as using traditional oils. You know, most of us as artists over the years said, we got a favorite color here, we got a favorite color there, right? And the same is with the water mixable technology. So yeah, you can use Cobra with the other branded products safely. And even though the chemistry may be a little different, the science is the same, right?
All right, and then I had one last question that I am aware of. I'm trying to scroll through to I got a lot of answers here for that giveaway, which is really awesome. Also including my parents saying, hi parents, that said that they feel like they could answer, but they feel like it would be wrong to put in an answer, which is so great. But hi folks. But then there was one more question that I wanted to get to. And it was Yvonne. She was asking about the cleanup and disposal of whether or not, if you use water or if you're using a solvent. I mean, you would dispose of a solvent the same way, I would assume, but specifically water.
Right. So a little bit easier with water, right? Because you're not working with a harmful solvent that in and of itself needs special handling and requirements. And depending on where you live in the country, it's always, I recommend, reaching out to your local city and county for their disposal suggestions for solvents. With water, you don't have that same concern. However, we're still painting with oil paint that includes pigments, and pigments themselves can have, ingredients, or the pigments may be carcinogenic, as with cobalts and cadmiums and whatnot. So you still want to take care and practice safe studio habits when using the Cobra. One recommendation that I see a lot of folks do is just letting pigments settle in your mixing bucket. So just like your solvent sitting there for a couple of days, all the pigment settles down to the bottom and you can pour that clean solvent off. The same is true with the water. The pigments are heavier, They will settle to the bottom. You can pour off that water, dispose of it safely down the drain, let that sludge dry, and then it's very safe to dispose of. Just like with a house paint can, you know, they don't want to pick it up if it's full of wet paint. They tell you to take the lid off, let it dry, and then you can throw it in the garbage. That stabilizes the pigments, makes them safe to dispose of. And so that usually, depending on where you live, is all that you need to do. Just pour off that water, let the rest of it evaporate, let that sludge dry, and you're going to be in business. But there are other techniques and practices out there too, and some great advice online as far as disposing safely of oil paint.
Yeah, I will say though, my personal favorite that I've heard from another vendor that we have usually coming on, it's Jimmy Leslie. I want to say you guys have met, but he always says, when you have like toxic pigments that are mixed into your water, if you don't have time to like let it settle and become sludge that you can scoop out and dispose of, pour it in kitty litter.
Yep.
Which is the coolest thing ever, because you don't think about it for that. But not only can it get your car out of the ice, it can also dispose of your paints and care for your cat. It's an amazing thing. I think we need to start selling kitty litter.
But
It
up in a new container.
Right. But as far as the cleanup though, with like your brushes and things like that, is it because it's water emulsifier? Would you use
soap and water? And then a lot of wonderful products out there. Brush cleaners also work, but you won't need any solvents like mineral spirits to clean your brushes. Just soap and water do the trick. Yeah.
I love it. Awesome. Well, that was our time. Everybody, thank you so much for watching. And Jeff, thank you for joining me. I am so glad you can make it here and while you're traveling around, and we're definitely going to have to get you in the studio.
Gotta love technology.
I love that we can go live no matter where. I'm also really happy that my dog isn't going crazy because she was almost going to be on the show. You guys don't know about this, but she was barking earlier.
She was waiting. She was lurking. She's been a good girl.
Yeah. But thank you all so much for watching. And yes, and join us next week. I want to say, God, I didn't even look it up. I want to say we're going to be painting roses. I want to, yes, because it's Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day is coming up. Side note, Valentine's Day is coming up. If you need to go get a Valentine's gift.
Can I make a quick announcement too?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so I'm traveling this week. Like I said, I'm going to be at SCAD, but next week I'll be back in the studio, and we have a show on Facebook, our Creator Studio Live. And next Thursday at 1 p.m. Is our next episode, 1 p.m. Eastern. And we're going to be celebrating Black History Month. We have one of our ambassadors, Charlene Mosley, and she has selected some of her favorite African-American women artists that she's going to be talking about. And I've collected a couple as well. And together we're going to be taking a walk through art history and contemporary art featuring women African-American artists. So please join us for that show. It's going to be a lot of fun and I think a lot of learning for everybody. Some great artist work to share.
That is awesome. And we watched that how?
So it's on Facebook, Royal Talens North America, Royal Talens NA, and Creator Studio Live, Thursday, February 10th, 1 p.m. Eastern.
Awesome. Well, I know what I'm doing on Thursday. All right. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. And everybody, I hope you have a wonderful evening or morning or whenever you're watching this. Just have a great day.
Bye, everyone.
We'll see you next time.